For Session Update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. Governor Dayton called a news conference Wednesday morning to discuss transportation, reinsurance, and other topics. He began by referring to a letter he'd written to the chairs of the House and Senate Transportation Committees, reminding them that the deadline for legislative approval to receive $105 million in federal money for road construction projects is March 31st. Here's that press conference.
Two letters to share today, so we'll start with them one at a time. Talk about first the transportation letter. This is related to money that was appropriated by the federal government to MnDOT last year and would have been included in the transportation bill last May, which of course was not agreed to. So then it carried forward to and we asked the LCC to approve what would normally be a routine approval for money, again, that's federal, that's specified, and where MnDOT has specified the project so it would benefit. Nothing's routine these days, so it carried forward. Representative Kelly insisted that the legislature have the final say in appropriating the money, so now we need the legislature to make the final say in appropriating this money for MnDOT to use in this construction season. As Commissioner Zelle can elaborate, if this approval is not made by the end of this month, by the end of March, some of these projects will miss the current upcoming construction season and they'll be delayed for a year, which would be just senseless. So again, the legislature said they wanted to have the final approval. We need them now to make the final approval. Commissioner Zelle?
Thank you, Governor. This $105 million is part of the federal allocation that comes to the state. We actually programmed them over a year ago. Our request goes back to a year when there wasn't a transportation bill, so we went through a normal process to gain approval. There was the objection. We had planned last fall to start the letting process in January. Now we're backing up these projects. And if you look at what these projects are, they're really bread and butter, normal highway, bridge, pavement reconstructions that's very valuable across the state. Contractors are contacting us, asking us when they can get started. We're ready to go. We'd like to put these out for letting in April. There will be a number of projects that we for sure will be delayed, and every week we lose the opportunity to do it this construction season.
Questions on this subject?
Have you talked to the chairman about this, Governor, and asked them to do something?
My staff has spoken with them, the commissioner's spoken with them. I have not specifically spoken with them on this particular matter.
And are you asking for a separate bill for federal and then go ahead with the overall?
Yeah, this is a separate bill just for this $105 million, a clean bill, no extraneous matters attached to it. And on my desk, ideally next week, but by March 31st at the very latest. By the end of next week is March 31st. So.
Does require a state match, or does the state just need to simply authorize this money?
We have the full funding in place for all the projects. No, this is funding that we have, part of our plan. Again, last year's work. And I have talked to the chairmans and we've testified. And what concerns us now is when we see proposals coming from the House and the Senate that include this funding, it kind of implies that this is going to be part of the overall transportation funding toward the end of the session, which means that this last year's work is really being delayed that much more.
It's also been applied to called quote unquote new money in the House. I don't know if the Senate also in their bill, which is just not true.
When's the next federal payment? Will it be coming? Will you get another one yet this year, or is this it for the year?
Well, this is no. This is funding that came. We're aware of as perhaps in August, but we had already a year ago knew we were going to have federal funds under the FAST Act. What is in some of the Senate and House proposals is to take all the anticipated federal funding over the next 2 years, including this 105, to be part of the overall funding package. But as we know, we've already programmed all of our federal funds as well as state funds that we know are coming. So this is not new revenue. It is revenue from the federal government that we've known about, we've counted on, and the 105, again, was from last year. It's ready to go, but we do not have, a technical word is spending authority that is granted by the legislature.
You know, we're already getting used to dealing with alternative facts. Now we're having to start to deal with alternative numbers. And this is one example with these two House and Senate budget proposals for transportation, which counts money that's not new money, and we'll get into that in more detail as the weeks unfold.
Or Commissioner, just to clarify, this bill, or this language is moving through the House and Senate, but it's included in the bill, therefore is, in your view, not effective enough, it's not going to work?
We've been discussions about how this funding relating to last year should be standalone because of the urgency and the defined projects that are ready to go. So that's correct. The fact that it is part of the funding for this legislation relating to future years is inappropriate. We'd like to see it standalone. And
we need to take it out of the bill in a separate standalone bill passed in the next few days.
correct.
Well, Commissioner and Governor,
Let me also say, we've been dealing with the legislative leadership on this matter. I've been dealing since last fall. I spoke directly with Representative Kelly, then the chair of the House Transportation Committee, twice last fall, and urged that he relent, as every other member of the LCC was prepared to do, just a standard approval for money, and he was unwilling to relent. So he said, well, the legislature needs to have the final say. Well, now we need the legislature to make the final say on a timely basis, or all these projects all over the state are going to lose the construction season.
are they just trying to pump the number in their plan up by $105 million with federal funds so they don't have to get it someplace else?
I have to ask them what their intention is. But
what are your thoughts in terms of what their strategy is?
I think I said, we're dealing with alternative numbers now.
Is the concern about the delay simply because of the construction season in Minnesota? Is there anything from the federal government that would make this money go away if it is not approved in a timely manner?
Thank you very much. That's actually a good question. If we continue to delay further, there is a possibility we would actually lose the funds if it goes well into the summer. So that possibility is there. We can't say for certain because, of course, there's a lot of different moving parts. But number one risk is that we're ready to go with contractors on defined projects right away. But as we get into the summer, there is the risk of losing some of the federal funds that would be in the August rebalancing. We don't spend the money, this money will go to other states that frankly have projects that are ready to go. We are usually an importer of federal funds because we have usually defined projects. But if we lose that status, we would lose the federal funds.
Why did the department go ahead and let the contractors, if you didn't have approval for this money, isn't that putting the cart before the horse?
We haven't put them out for letting. We have it planned, we have it scoped, we have everything ready, but we have not started the letting process because we don't have the federal funding authority.
How much is the total amount that would be spent, the $105 million from federal, but overall, total amount?
I can't say overall our construction season is, capital budget is significantly less than it has been in previous years. I think we're looking at somewhere in the nature of $700 million for the in total construction season. But $105 million is a significant part, and that originally was going to be, set up last year for this year.
But these projects that you list, is that $700 million or?
No, that's 105.
Okay, so.
These projects are entirely federal funded.
Yes.
Okay. And how much more federal money are you expecting this year?
I don't have an answer, although our chief financial officer, if she's in the audience, might have it. But in our state road construction budget, I would say it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, part of the FAST Act.
President Trump has talked about a massive transportation infrastructure bill for the entire nation. Have you gotten any details on what that may mean? Have you calculated what that may mean for Minnesota?
Well, thank you. I think we all look with great anticipation, and we're ready to go. We have projects that are shovel ready, and many are unfunded. So I know as much as you. We're very curious, although I hear there's more conversation this week about trying to find some infrastructure funding, but we're really kind of standing by like all other states.
Commissioner, I'm wondering if somebody could walk me through the timing of this, because you guys are asking for a bill by March 31st. The language is included in the omnibus transportation bill. At what point did the administration give the legislature any notice that not acting by this deadline of March 31st?
Last fall, I told Representative Kelly that, this had to be approved. It should have been approved last fall through the LCC process, since it wasn't approved a year ago in the legislative session, that delays like this would jeopardize the projects for this coming construction season. This has been explicit with them, with staff, with the commissioner, all the way through, from the very beginning of the legislative session. They know exactly what the situation is, what the timetable is, and just no reason or no excuse for delaying this past the end of next week, so we can get these projects underway and put people to work all over Minnesota and make these necessary improvements all over Minnesota. They talk about their concern for greater Minnesota. This is greater Minnesota spending right here.
I wanted to reiterate, I wrote a letter to both chairs of the transportation committees giving that March 31st date some time ago. So this has not been a mystery, and we've been talking, and they've been very interested in the projects, and in many cases giving us indications that they recognize the urgency and wanted to move forward. So they're well aware of the deadlines.
Is the mix of projects up for discussion, or are these set? Like, no matter what, the $105 million would go to these things?
The $105 million is very specific in our plans and what we're ready to spend. So it's there's no ambiguity about which projects will be delayed and where the money's going.
But they couldn't put forward alternative projects that get money to things that they prefer instead?
There is indications from their proposals over the past few days that they would like very much to earmark projects with both federal funds and state funds. And we have great concerns about the earmarking process because it leapfrogs some of the other projects, which under our kind of fairly objective performance measures have a higher urgency. We like many of the projects that they have indicated as part of an earmark process, but we're concerned about both there's inadequate funding for some of those projects and that they leapfrog really urgent projects that really need attention.
This is another example of what happens when we have chronic insufficiency of transportation funding. You get people going to their legislators to say, bump us ahead of the objective rating process, which has been reviewed by the legislative auditor and others and found to be not perfect, but full of integrity and objectivity, and saying, well, no, since we don't have enough money to do everything, we want to do our project before these others. And it's just, I described some of this also with the balkanization of transportation funding and the pitting of regions against one another. It's all symptomatic of not having enough money invested in transportation dollars so we can meet all of these urgent needs.
Governor, can you continue on in that vein? Give us your general reaction to the entire House and Senate proposals.
Well, we're analyzing them. As I say, there's money that's counted that's already been committed. There's over $1 billion in the House bill of federal money that's already forthcoming. Of course, they're both taking a significant amount of money from the general fund, and that's very, very direct. And in the context of whatever else, now we'll talk about reinsurance in a minute. That's going to come in part maybe out of the general fund, and we got other things, the tax bills. I mean, they're spending like they're on a crash credit card course, but they haven't come up with numbers, first of all, that are real, and they haven't come up with numbers that all come together and show us, how this fits within the scope of a balanced budget. So it's premature, and it's going to be premature. We told them to really get into serious discussions on these until we get real numbers following the format that's dictated by statute, where they're comparing their spending increases to the forecast rather than to 16, 17 biennial spending. So we have accurate apples-to-apples comparisons, and then when these numbers get real, and then they say, well, a lot of them are going to be decided by committees. So when the committees have approved the bills and we know specifically what they're going to spend on what, then we'll have something to talk about. Until then, it's all speculative. Let's just finish on this subject. Is there anything else on transportation?
Yes, I have a transportation related. On top of all that, there are 84 members of the House and Senate who have signed a bill asking the Trump administration, or signed a letter asking the Trump administration not to send federal funding for light rail transit. Your reaction?
Well, it's become the theology that they're against light rail when they offer no alternative. When you take Southwest specifically, look at the route from Eden Prairie, Minneapolis. There's no alternative route. I mean, express buses going 494 to Highway 100, say, and then down 394 in the middle of rush hour. I mean, it's nonsensical. So what they're doing is by opposing light rail, they're opposing. We could get into this later. I don't want to get into it now. The funding for Metro Transit through the Met Council and the CTIB, everything that they're not only pushing onto the local governments, but they're also inhibiting their ability to operate, make capital investments and operate. They're pushing everybody into their cars and onto the highways. And we have over 800,000 more people expected to be living in the metropolitan area by 2040. We've already got serious congestion all over the metro area and the highways, and they're just going to make it worse. They have no alternative. It's just no, and there's no alternative. Unfortunately, in a case like this, you're not going to realize the real effects until I think Southwest is scheduled to start in 2021. That waits to be seen. So what we're talking about projects and as well as capital investments in bus lines that are not going to begin to be realized for another 5 years and down the road. So right now it's a freebie to say, well, we're against it. But the consequences of it are really going to be felt in the future, and particularly in the decades to come. It also reinforces this other myth that they've perpetrated, which is this is money that's being taken from greater Minnesota highways and devoted to Southwest Light Rail for the metro area. The federal government has made it clear, the previous administration, we have no change in this administration, that these funds cannot be used for highways, roads, or bridges. If we don't use this money, as it stands now, use this money for the light rail line, it'll go to some other state for their public transit project. It's just as clear cut as could be, and they just want to keep muddling it and trying to make politics out of this to the detriment of the future of this state. And it's really reprehensible. I should also point out the 3 Republican legislators who have in whose district this Southwest line goes did not sign the letter.
Governor, are you open to other types of funding to replace the gas tax, such as charge on electric cars or mileage tax, something like that?
We have to have a transportation bill. And, at least, I mean, the general fund, the only thing I'll say for it is straightforward. It's not, it's misappropriating general fund dollars, but it's real money. It's coming in. It would go for transportation as opposed to education and healthcare, public safety, other needs. And that's going to be, again, that's where we have to wait until the end and we see what the trade-offs are going to be. But, it's real money, but it is going to come. Now, we're fortunate we have a surplus, Thanks to the 2% tax increase, which they opposed, we have a surplus. Thanks to economic recovery, which they predicted wouldn't happen, we have a surplus. So now they want to, spend this surplus around on, insurance companies and on, transportation projects rather than raising any dedicated revenues for transportation, because we have that luxury over these next 2 years, hard-earned. But, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, the national economy changes. If, as the feds devolve onto the states, the additional costs of healthcare, future legislators and governors are going to go right into that crunch that could be avoidable now, but they're just setting it up. They're setting up for the future. And you can look at what happened back after the tax cuts in 2000, 2001, and those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat its mistakes.
But Governor, aren't you also spending the surplus except on programs rather than tax cuts?
Well, I put it on an opening bid. We'll see what they turn out to be. I knew that they were going to come in with I was told they were going to come in with significant budget cuts, spending cuts. So, I mean, we got to start somewhere, so when they start where they are, we can find somewhere in the middle. But in my last supplemental bill, I'm proposing saving $200 million of the additional surplus, and I'd be willing to consider more than that, depending on how the other priorities shake out.
But isn't it, you're basically making a political choice to spend it on programs. They're making a political choice to spend it on tax cuts, and you're criticizing them for their political choice, not their actual spending.
Well, I'm criticizing their priorities, yes. I'm criticizing that their priorities are, this mythology that we raised everybody's taxes, which we haven't, so therefore we have to give money back because we have a surplus. We have a surplus because we raised income taxes on the wealthiest 2%. That's $1.4 billion for the next biennium. We didn't raise income taxes on anybody else. And so now there's this mythology that they perpetrate that, the most important thing for everybody in Minnesota is to get a tax cut. Well, everybody would like a tax cut, but you permanently reduce the amount of revenue that's coming into the state for the next biennium, and then for the one, and these numbers ratchet up in the following biennium, and they're setting the state up for another fiscal crash, and somewhere in the not immediate future, but still foreseeable future.
Anything else on transportation?
Thanks. You're good. All right, on to the next round. They had to pay twice to get in here, right? So
reaction to the budget proposals that have come out from the House and Senate.
Okay, I want to talk about this letter on reinsurance, if you could please, and then I'll open up to anything else. This is another letter that I sent today to the conferees for the reinsurance bill. Now it's passed both the House and Senate. First of all, and I would say probably my foremost concern is the source of funding for up to $300 million per year for this reinsurance program. As it stands now, the Senate and House bills have it variously taken out of general fund, healthcare access fund, and even out of the reserve fund. I've urged, and I've talked directly with the legislative leaders for weeks on this, that the money, most, if not all of it, come from an assessment on the insurance industry for every premium is sold and like, and that would generate the same funding mechanism that was used for MSHA previously. So it's a proven funding mechanism, and it would relieve this burden for the next 2 years very significant off of those other funds that should be used for people for other purposes. Secondly, second paragraph of the letter points out the federal government would be a source of up to 30% of the funds for this. So we're talking $300 million a year. We're talking about $90 million a year, $180 million for the biennium that could be offset by the federal money. But the feds have made it clear that the language in the bill has to make the program contingent on receiving the federal funding. Now, I can understand the reluctance of legislators to condition this bill on federal action, but the fact is it costs us $90 million a year not to have it in. I think it's a prudent addition to the bill. Thirdly, and I've stressed this again with legislative leaders and with the health insurance industry for weeks now, we need to have assurances from the individual insurance companies that they're going to stay in this individual market and that their rates are going to be reduced commensurate with the $300 million a year of taxpayer money that's going in to subsidize their operations. I haven't received response from any of the health plans to whom I sent the letter last week. I'm not going to sign a bill until I've received those responses from each of them. I think we have a right to know, legislature, taxpayers, how this money is going to be used. Is it going to achieve the intended purpose of keeping them in the individual market next year? And they're going to keep rates from rising further. They've already, Blue Cross Blue Shield pulled out last summer, which threw this whole individual market into serious jeopardy. Medica is now suing the state on another matter. These insurance companies are not demonstrating that they're in this market to serve the people of Minnesota. They're in it for their own financial benefit, and we got to make sure that we're protecting the people of Minnesota that we're proposing to spend serious money to achieve that purpose. And finally, I urge both Senate and House conferees to include the Minnesota Care buy-in proposal that I've made. It's been supported widely. If you talk about more competition, the Republicans have emphasized that. The premium relief bill added a provision for-profit insurers, another provision for agricultural co-ops to set up to create more competition, which I agree we need. We don't want another situation where we have only one provider, one plan covering significant parts of the state. Minnesota Care buy-in will provide more affordable health insurance to people all over the state. It'll provide a broader network of healthcare providers, doctors, hospitals, and the like, so people can use the doctors in their area rather than have to drive miles to find a doctor that works within the insurer's system. It provides exactly what people want, which is more affordable care, better choices, and another choice in addition to the commercial insurers. And I urge them to include this as part of the package. And part of what we're saying is we need to do to improve the status quo with health care in Minnesota. You know, time has passed for all the finger pointing and the blaming and scapegoating that's going on, and it's been very effective politically, but people want solutions. We are where we are now, and with Republicans in leadership positions in Washington as well as here in Minnesota, we have a shared responsibility here in St. Paul to come up with solutions that are going to lower the cost of health care for Minnesotans, provide them with access to affordable care, and ensure the stability in the market that hasn't existed previously. And that's all of our responsibility, and that's how this measure should be judged. So again, I'd be glad to respond to questions on this subject, and then I'll open it up to anything else.
Governor, you say that you will not sign the bill unless you have a response from the leaders of the HMOs, or the chief heads of the HMOs.
The plans, yeah.
Yeah, the plans. Are you saying that you won't sign a bill unless they give you specific assurances that premiums won't go up any one of this, or that they'll stay in the market? Are you saying that?
I want to see what they're going to say. But I won't sign a bill until I get responses from each of them. I think I'm deserve, and not on my behalf, but on behalf of the people of Minnesota, a response to those essential questions from each of them.
Let's say, Governor, that they respond.
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals, Bill. We'll see what they say. I don't know whether I'll sign it or not based on what they say until I know what they say.
Governor, is the Minnesota Care buy-in also a condition?
No, it's not a condition. It's a strong urging on my part, but I'm not going to condition it on that.
What about having at least some form of funding coming from new revenue?
That's a real concern. I have really very serious doubts, and I don't understand their arguments against using that approach, which has been used before. We've looked at the numbers in terms of a percent that would be applied, and there's, depending on how much money it would raise, it may not be enough for everything, depending on what the cost is. But it certainly would be what, more than half, Lauren, and up to maybe 2/3, 3/4 of the cost. So it's a very viable source. It's been used before. And again, the alternative is to take money out of the general fund or the healthcare access fund or the reserve, and that's just money out of other important needs. And you add that to taking money out of the general fund for transportation, and already, and then we already did the premium relief, and then you got a tax bills that up to and exceeding $1 billion, and they're already well over the $1.65 billion surplus projected. So, again, and the thing with the reinsurance is it's got to be passed by the end of this month. We all are in agreement about that. So we don't have time to wait and see how this amount of spending out of the general fund, say, will affect the overall budget, because it won't be finalized by then. So once again, they're treading into dangerous territory in terms of overspending before we know all the consequences. And all of this is going to be before we're going to know the consequences of what the federal government will do, which will drag into the summer, I expect, in terms of the actual details of the health care reform, if it passes, whatever. So, I mean, they're really, worked so hard to reestablish fiscal integrity and fiscal stability for state government. And, I'm not going to see that sacrificed for short-term partisan gain.
Is there anything else that has to be done before April 1st to prepare for next?
I'm not aware of anything else. Is there anything else we know of?
The House committee this afternoon is going to talk about turning MNsure actions over to federal exchange. Can you react to that?
Why? MNsure is performing very well. It's not MNsure's fault these rates went up. MNsure is a marketplace where the insurers set the rates. And they can ascribe the blame for that to the Affordable Care Act and the additional requirements and the way it changed the composition of the individual market clientele. But MNsure didn't set those rates. MNsure performed, from all accounts, very well in this last go-around. So now we wanted to go through a transfer of that to the federal government at a cost of, what's the estimated cost?
We haven't seen the final fiscal note, but it's at least a few $1 million.
No. And give up our authority, especially before we know what the federal government's going to do. I just think it's ill-advised.
Other questions on this topic?
Okay, so now we're on to anything and everything else.
Governor, how do you feel about the direction that the legislature is going on environmental policy? Their omnibus bill contains agency cuts, the elimination of EPD, and delaying of your buffers law.
Well, the buffers is not negotiable, not for discussion. I will veto any bill that has any gutting or delay in the buffer. I went through that last year with them. I took the private dishes out 2 years ago at the request of legislative leaders, thinking that would ameliorate the situation. Didn't. They came back last year for more. We agreed finally. They're on record, and members of the legislature as well as interest groups, that they were satisfied with the bill, and now they wanted to go back and delay it again, as though there's no urgency to our water contamination problem in the state. Let's just put it off for another year. It doesn't matter. It isn't going to affect anybody's life. It's just inexcusable and unacceptable. On the other matters, we'll have to negotiate because there's so many of them, but it's a tragedy that they want to roll back the kind of efforts that are made to protect our environment, protect our quality of our air and water and land, as well as sabotage efforts to improve it. Got the ability of agencies, they want to delay they talk about efficiency in government, they want to delay rulemaking processes, make it more difficult. It's just all about thwarting the various efforts that have been made, the progress that's been made to improve the quality of our environment. And if you look at many of the sources of many of these provisions, they're individual constituents. Somebody isn't getting their processing plant because they have a potato or a big processing plant. So they go to their legislature and complain. Now we got a whole statewide legislative proposal based on one company's vested interest in a different outcome. So it's very concerning, and we'll have a lot of talking to do about it all.
Have you seen budget bills that you like?
Well, I haven't seen real numbers yet. I can't. The House comes out with a budget bill that cuts Health and Human Services by $600 million, and they're asked at the press event, what are the specifics there? And the answer is, well, that'll be decided in committee. Well, I'm concerned about that kind of cut. But first of all, it's not an accurate comparison with the way the state statute requires budgets to be formulated and presented, which is contrast the proposed spending, or in their case would be the actual spending, with the forecast, last November's forecast, updated in February, for what the current law requires to be spent, areas like education per pupil and the like. Instead, they went back to the 16-17 budget for comparison, which skews their numbers. So we can't even begin an intelligent discussion about what our differences are, because we can't until they put these numbers in what is legally required and what is accurate. So we have to talk about. I went through this before. If we can't agree at the outset on what the numbers are, we can't just agree on those basic facts. There's it's going to be virtually impossible to come to a resolution on the budget, which is imperative. So the answer to your question is that I can't say until I have better specificity and better accuracy.
Governor, the House and Senate seem to be outbidding each other on who can cut taxes more. We're going to get more details from the House later this afternoon. What's your initial reaction to the $1.35 billion and the $900 million markers that they put out there?
Well, again, it has to be seen in the context of a total budget, because they have the same obligation I did, which is to present and produce a balanced budget. So you talk about $1.3 billion, and if we have a $1.6 billion surplus now, they're proposing drastic cuts for agencies. And I haven't seen, the details of where those are, what people are going to be affected by this. This is not about slashing bureaucracies. That's a small part of these numbers. It's about programs and services and direct payments to people all over Minnesota. So, until we see what the consequences of those are and what the trade-off is then for the kind of tax cuts that they want to propose, and they haven't detailed in most cases that either, who are actually going to get the benefits of these tax cuts, as well as what's the effect of these tax cuts in the future biennium. I mean, there's just too many unanswered questions right now. They have a perfect right to put forward their numbers and their proposals, and again, once they put the details to them and we know what they were really talking about, then we'll have something to discuss.
You're concerned that you're so far apart from them that I know there's 2 months left in the session, but those days go by pretty quickly in terms of trying to reach agreement by adjournment.
Well, at this point in 2011, we were $3 billion apart. Myself and the Republican majorities. I came down $1.5 billion and sat there, and they wouldn't budge, so we ended up with a shutdown. It doesn't. What concerns me is not the difference. The dollar difference is my question is the willingness to find middle ground, and that's going to take give on my part. It's going to take give on their part. And that'll be the critical determinant, as well as all this policy garbage that they're throwing into these bills. They think they can ram them down my throat, the policy measures that are bad for Minnesota, and that I won't accept by tying them to appropriation bills, which eventually have to be signed. Well, I've told them before and keep saying, policy measures don't belong in budget bills. Budgets belong in budget bills. And if they want to send all these other policy measures to me, we can deal with them separately. But if they keep insisting on lumping those into budget bills, they're going to really confound the process.
Governor, is it your expectation that you're going to veto several of these budget bills because...
I'm not going to. I'm not saying what I'll veto or what I didn't. I vetoed one this week. That's the one veto I stand on at this point. I don't know whether I'm going to veto or not because I don't know what the details. I don't know what amenability. We'll work with them in the conference committees. We'll work with them, and see if we can find some common accord. But I'm not going to say I'm going to veto or not veto anything until I know the final specifics.
Governor, the head of the Minnesota Sheriff's Association says they're going to have to look at ways of getting around you. That's the way he characterized it after this dispute over mutual aid deployment to the North Dakota Access Pipeline protest.
Well, I think it's a very contrived issue. I don't know who's behind it, Mr. Franklin or some of the other local sheriffs who want to kind of make something out of this. It's a very politically charged situation in North Dakota. The letter accused me of making a political decision. The political decision was made by North Dakota and the pipeline company months ago to force this matter. And they've ensnared 2 presidents' administrations and national organizations and everything else. And once we send Minnesota law enforcement over to North Dakota, they're under the command of the North Dakota authorities. So if the North Dakota authorities were to decide to engage in something very confrontational and dangerous, they'd be under that command for that strategic moment. So I think it was uncalled for, it was unwise, it was unnecessary. North Dakota has plenty of money that they can use to send their own law enforcement, their own National Guard. They sent out a request of all 50 states just to try to pull other states into this and make it a broader political dispute than what they already have.
Do you disagree, Governor, with how North Dakota handled that situation with the indigenous?
I disagree. I think the consequences, I didn't spend a lot of time, frankly. I read about it, but it's not part of my purview. So that's my opinion. It's not the basis on which I made this decision. And we're going to have pipeline issues here too. That's another consideration. if we ensnare Minnesotans in a very controversial and highly charged situation just across our border, North Dakota, that could be a spillover effect when these pipeline issues come to Minnesota, as they will in the next couple of years.
Did you talk to the North Dakota governor about this?
He didn't talk to me. I was available, and I saw him at the NGA, and he said not one word about this. He spent all the time we were together. It was a very cordial conversation, talking about the diversion project around Fargo-Moorhead. They withdrew the request just like 3 days after it was submitted from all the states. I mean, I don't know what prompted it initially, but it confirmed my view that it wasn't really necessary to cope with the situation. But the previous governor, Jack Dalrymple, I'd known for 50 years. He has my phone number. He had it. And the new governor does as well.
So are you concerned that if Minnesota has trouble with pipeline protesters, that North Dakota won't send somebody?
I don't know. We'll have to see. I have no idea. I don't know that we'll ask for it. We'll have to see. I mean, I think we want to manage. It's one thing to have a disaster and be overwhelmed by a natural disaster or some man-made, disastrous event, and in that immediate situation be overwhelmed and need of personnel. And in fact, 3 of the Minnesota local law enforcement authorities responded previously and went over there. It's another thing if you created your own quagmire to say, clean up your own swamp, and that would be my first take on anything that we are dealing with here in Minnesota. I'm not calling pipeline controversies a swamp, but in general, I think we're responsible for dealing with our own and making whatever effort is necessary in terms of allocation. We have mutual aid packs within Minnesota among all the law enforcement, and they're tremendous at responding and as the need arises. And we have National Guard, if God forbid that became necessary. And I would view this as a Minnesota responsibility before I considered asking any other state for assistance. But we're talking a hypothetical here. I don't want to borrow trouble. We got enough trouble for us right now.
The issue of felon voting came up in a House committee. The issue of felon voting came up in a House committee yesterday. Where are you on that?
Well, I think once people have served their time, paid their debt to society, they deserve a reinstatement of their rights as citizens, and would include voting. We have a protracted probation periods. We have shorter sentences and protracted probation periods, and that's the issue, as I understand now, is whether felons should be able to vote during that time. I haven't looked at the details of the legislation to see specifically, but again, I think this is fast. If we want to rehabilitate criminals, former criminals, one of the best ways to do it is to help them become full-fledged members of society and productive members of society, and finding jobs and housing and stability in their lives. And I think voting should be considered to be part of that full citizenship.
Last question.
How's your health?
I feel pretty good, I could get better, a little more cardiovascular. I got my grandson for his 4th birthday next Monday in an electric car, which goes, I think, up to 5 miles an hour. So if I spend my time running around chasing that, should improve my conditioning considerably. That wasn't the motivation behind doing it, and don't anybody tell Hugo if he spoiled my surprise. Thank you.